I want to welcome you to the Pro Mindset Podcast. The Pro Mindset Podcast is all about diving into the headspace that results in championship performance. High-performing athletes, winners, have this mental flow and have a positive headspace for their performances and success. Join me, Craig Domann, sports attorney and NFL agent, on this podcast. I will interview pro athletes, college athletes, football coaches, and sports personalities. Together, we can discover how you can get in the flow and have your own pro mindset. We're going to get started this morning. I'm with Jay Foreman. I want to welcome you to Pro Mindset. Jay, holy smokes, in doing some background work on you, you were one of two recruiting classes at the University of Nebraska that laid claim to 3 national championships.
Yeah. I always tell people, I guess we had some good talent, but I think it was, good timing as well. I think that the one thing I've learned as I've gotten older, national championships, and championships in general are kind of 2 or 3 years ahead. Obviously Nebraska had to, deal with some tough losses and change their identity. But I think that our class was a special class in the sense that we had a good mix of, star power, guys that needed to reach their potential, and good, solid foundation guys. And we were all the kind of lucky enough for the most part to get through 4 or 5 years, relatively injury free. So we were, accountable and available as well.
Well, I want to introduce you, give you a fair introduction here. Won 3 national championships at Nebraska, drafted in the 5th round by the Buffalo Bills after your senior season. Played for 9 seasons.
Yep. And
going back to Nebraska, you weren't a bench warmer. You were a captain. You were all-conference kind of guy and a big-time performer for Nebraska when they won those last couple national championships. Let's go back to kind of your beginnings. You're from the Twin Cities.
Yep.
A lot of people may not know or may remember. I remember, but a lot of people may not remember. Your dad was a go-to guy for the Minnesota Vikings back in the 70s. Leading rusher, 1,000-yard rusher multiple times, Pro Bowler 5 times or something like that.
Yep.
And I know I kind of did some math, and you were a baby when your dad was playing in the NFL.
Yeah.
So when was it that you first realized that your father was kind of famous?
It was probably about 6th, 7th grade, because I grew up in D.C. where all my family's from. And then once he retired and laid his roots back in Minnesota, we moved from the East Coast to, Midwest or, pretty much the North, the tundra. And I always kind of thought of him as dad and as such. But he came to school one day and picked me up, and it seemed everybody was turning their heads. And one kid came up to me, he's like, "Do you know who your dad is?" And I was like, "No." And then, as that kind of made me be more aware of it. And, he kind of, what he really did was try to keep me away from all the hoopla and just wanted me to be a kid. So it worked out pretty well. But growing up in Minneapolis, some big shoes to fill. And so you had to grow up a lot faster, than normal. But it was a good thing. You have children, and a lot of famous players have children. And it's very rare that there's generational success. So you had success, 9 years in the NFL is by everybody's definition right.
Success. And it looks like you had at least 3 seasons where you had at least 100 or more tackles. Yeah. So you were a prime-time performer at one point in time during your career. You weren't just a practice squad guy or a guy running down on teams. What do you attribute that success to? And what, if anything, have you done with your own kids to give them the opportunity to be successful, even if it's not in the NFL?
Right.
If you have a daughter, it's, she's not going to play in the NFL, but you want your children to have the opportunity to be successful like you and your dad.
Sure. The main thing that he ever told me, this is pretty much the only thing he ever told me, was anything that you do, he wanted to see me do it 100%. I remember from a very early age, and I tell all my kids this, he's like, I tell them, and just like he told me, I don't care how good you are. All I care about is how much effort that you put into it. When you play whatever sport, whether in my case, basketball, football, baseball, track, in my daughter's cases in basketball or softball, try 100%. Because what he knew, if I went out there and gave my effort and 100% into it, good things will happen. So he kept it really simple. And that's just something that I've always hung on to. Any kid that comes up and asks me, or any parent asks for an advice, I tell them that. Now, obviously, you got to have the drive and discipline and stuff like that. But once the effort's there, all that stuff kind of is with it. And I haven't come across any professional athlete or any good person in any type of, whether it's athletics or business, that isn't fully focused and dedicated to whatever they're good at. Some more than others, but in order to get to the top, you have to be extremely good, but you have to put a lot of effort into it. And the guys that last, generally put more effort into it. And so that's what I wanted to maximize everything I had to do. But one thing that was probably different than me and my dad, I enjoy high pressure situations. I like that. I'll always like that. And so, that's what the only struggle me and him had. He wanted to shelter me from it because, on the surface, a lot of people think, you don't want your kid to be compared to it. I wanted to. I like proving people wrong. And so it's something that drove me and fueled me. And then he directed me in the right direction to use what I was good at, which is being competitive, and put me in, positions in sports and stuff like that to maximize it. So I had a great support system as well.
Okay, so you brought up two things that resonate with me. One is controlling what you can control,
right,
which is your effort. And two is there had to be a lot of effort going on in Lincoln, Nebraska back in the mid-90s.
Yeah.
Okay, because it reveals itself in performance.
Sure.
Right? So who's the guy that took you under his wing when you were a college player, let's say freshman, sophomore, that taught you the ropes to have more of a championship effort, championship approach, championship work ethic? Because you don't win championships without those.
Yeah, I was very fortunate when I came in, and sometimes I always tell people, you got to be good, you got to be lucky. And so I was primarily a running back in high school because that's, of course, my dad played. So what do you think they're going to do? Stick your son at running back? And I was good. I got a lot of people recruited me at running back. I looked on the depth chart, saw Lawrence Phillips and Damon Benning, Clinton Childs, and Calvin Jones I think went to the NFL early. Lawrence was a freshman. I actually watched him against Florida State. So I knew that there would be, that's a big hill to climb just to get on the field, because Lawrence, as a freshman, was pretty special.
Well, he was a superstar from the jump.
They tried to get me to play wingback, and I was like, I'm not interested in diving on the ground and cut blocking. And so it was either safety or linebacker, and they moved me down to linebacker because of my frame. Never played it before, but I knew football. And I'd probably seen thousands of football games, whether it's being at training camp or being around the guys. So, just by loving football, I kind of felt like I knew how to play defense or linebacker. And so once I got there, I had to improve a lot. Christian Peter was really good to me, where he pushed me, physically and mentally. But the guy that really had a big impact on me was Clint Brown. He was the backup to Troy Dumas, who ended up being a 4th-round pick my freshman year. I had the red shirt. Clint was a senior from Western Nebraska out in the Kearney area. And Clint, for whatever reason, maybe he saw something in me or liked the way I just kind of showed up and shut up, which you should do as a young guy. He took me in the weight room every single day, and he challenged me and had me work. I was his workout partner. So he told me, on the squat, I want you to go up 10 pounds every week. And on the bench, I want you to go up 5 pounds. And that was on every single lift. And then he started to explain to me what it meant to be a Husker from a Nebraska kid standpoint. And then everybody kind of saw, or the coaches saw me working out with him. And then Coach Samuel said, that's the guy you need to kind of look and see how he prepares every day, even though he's not a starter. Troy Dumas was an all Big 8 performer, a great player in his own right. But Clinton was always ready and willing and a good counterpart to Troy, where, he might only get 1 or 2 series, a game, but got in there and played well. And so I learned a lot from Clint and also from Troy too. But I tried to stay out of Troy's way because I figured, not only is he trying to do a great job his senior year, he's got the NFL to look forward to. So Clint took me underneath his wing. And then I just took the tools that he got me after my redshirt year and ended up starting, 4 years as a redshirt freshman. I think I was the first linebacker in 11 years to do it. And it was a lot of opportunity there. I started out 7th on the depth chart in spring and just worked my way up, whether it was one guy couldn't handle academics, a couple maybe didn't work hard, maybe really didn't love football. And then, of course, I was able enough to go out there and consistently make plays. And so I was very, very blessed to have that type of leadership from a starter and really from a second string guy that really had no obligation. Clinton was a senior. He was on the way out. He had done his due to the university. But the one thing I learned is that he paid it forward, where he invested in me just as much as I'm assuming somebody invested in him. And so I was able to take advantage of it and had a good opportunity, and, rest is history.
Let's talk about when you're a redshirt freshman and you're 7th on the depth chart.
Right.
And you didn't really specialize in linebacker in high school. Okay.
No.
So you're playing a brand new position on the opposite side of the ball.
Sure.
You may not be able to remember back then, but how, did you just put one foot in front of the other? Did you just take it one day at a time? What was kind of your secret sauce to moving up the depth chart?
What I did was even when I was a red shirt, I would go in there and find out when the seniors were watching tape, which is Troy and Clint, and watch tape with them. I was dead silent. I took notes. But then one thing my dad told me, he's like, look, you used to play running back. Think of what the running back would do from a defensive side. And then that kind of lessened the learning curve. And the biggest thing for me was, how to get off blocks and how to do two things at once and focus on just getting off the block and then making the play versus I know where the play is going, and then you run in there and you end up getting blocked. So it was more of a technical thing. Knowing where to line up and assignments and all that stuff, that was pretty easy because I loved it. I figured, look, one thing my dad told me, he's like, if you can do your schoolwork, you can learn a playbook. It's the same thing. You just have to break it down and make it very simple. So that was my secret sauce. I just dove into it. I would try things, and if it didn't work out, so be it, but I would keep it in my memory bank. And then once I kind of started to get some confidence, once I kind of learned how to use the techniques, and once I got some sort of positive feedback of doing it, and whether it was I got a little bit stronger or I read it a little bit faster, then I just started to build momentum, and I just put in more effort than guys. I watched tape during or before practice. After practice on my off days, I lifted a day or two more because I knew that I had to get bigger. Because, you're going – literally, I went from high school, and then, there were 6 months I didn't play, obviously when we won that first national championship. But the next year's coming. So what is it, like 15 months? That's just pretty much another year in high school. So I knew I had to catch up. And so I mapped it out. In order for me to catch up, if I worked out 1 or 2 days extra during the football season, all the way leading up to the next fall, that equivalated to 60 extra workouts. That's 2 more months for me. And then, when you're burning a lot of calories and you have the effort, you can make a lot of strides. So that's how I was able to not only get to the depth chart from 7th and not even be listed, when they had the top 3, I was below the top 3, but make some strides and then cement myself too. Because, one thing that my dad told me is, okay, now you got here. Now you got to not only keep it, but then you got to accentuate it. And so that first year, 95, was very trying from more of a mental standpoint and a spiritual standpoint, because knowing the plays and going out there and giving effort, that was something that I've been doing ever since I played any sports. But dealing with the ups and downs, and some games you might only play 15 plays because we were beating guys so bad, or different packages, or getting pushed, or if they wanted to add guys into it because we were able to dictate the offensive schemes based on being up by so much. So then we kind of went to a dime defense. Well, I'm a young guy. They started moving, Jamel Williams to find he was faster, smaller, into my spot. So now I'm competing all over again. So then you got to deal with that. So that was probably more of that was the hardest part. But you know what? I was no different than the kids now. The first thing I wanted to do after facing adversity, I was, on the phone to Michigan and all that other stuff. And then my dad sat me down and said, look, man, there's going to be guys everywhere. And
you can't run from competition.
Can't run from competition.
Nope.
And you never have. And so it made me go to another level. And it was something I hated doing because I felt like I worked hard enough to why me, or, but I knew that finally, that's when I realized everything's bigger than me. I'm just a small piece in the puzzle, but I need to make that a solid piece. And then that's what I did from there on out. But it was a challenging year. As great as 95 was, it was a very, very challenging year. But as I look back on it now, I think it helped me last actually 9 years in the NFL, because that was an NFL season for me from a rookie standpoint, or dealing with all different types of stuff. That was it for me. So by the time I got there, I was like, this is not a piece of cake, but I'd been down that road before.
Kayla, so let's dive into ball for a moment. You mentioned that, let's say it's a run and play at the point of attack coming at you, or let's say it's flown away. It doesn't really matter. You broke it down into 2 parts. One is identifying where the obstacle's coming from. What's
right.
The blocker? And then, at the same time, you're almost doing it simultaneously, figuring out how you're going to make the play, what angle you're taking.
Right.
So let's pretend like you're talking to a high school kid or anybody. It could be a pro. It
Sure.
doesn't matter who it is. He's playing linebacker. Help him walk through that thought process of attacking the blocker or avoiding the blocker.
Right.
And at the same time, putting yourself in the best possible position to make a play.
Right. First thing I always tell people, and this is one of the greatest things I've ever been told, and it's actually when I was a rookie. And it was by Lawrence Taylor and kind of like my mentor, Sam Cowart. They said, hey, look, there's one ball. Don't leverage the block, leverage the ball. Now, granted, Lawrence, he's probably, in my opinion, the best football player ever. But I understood it. It really opened my eyes. It was almost like clearing things up in my head. The first thing I would tell guys, like especially from a middle linebacker standpoint, you're just as important as the quarterback. So first thing you need to do is know what everybody has to do. That was from the defensive linemen, outside linebackers, opposite. If there's a weak side linebacker, strong safety, free safety, and corner, because everything affects you, and you're in the middle of the defense. So you're actually in a money position because you got a 50% chance of making a play to the right or left. And that's my first thing I would tell them. But when you know that, then you know where in every play, as far as a running play, there's two people that can block you from a middle linebacker. It's play side or backside. And you're generally going to have one gap on play side and one on weak side. So if you know where the defensive linemen go, then you can make a calculated guess, or I always say play the percentages. So if I know in an over defense, which is for you people out there, is the nose guard shaded to the backside of the center, and then there's a gap right in the next one, which is the A gap, and then there's a 3 technique in the B gap, and say you have a 7 technique from a defensive end, which is head up to outside shade or inside shade of a tight end. So that means the A gap is only open and anything on outside. But if you have a safety go there, safety that's coming down in the D gap, which is outside, that play goes to the right. You shoot that A gap, you won't get blocked. Now, if you do take on a blocker, that's when you have to know where your help is from or coming from. And that's in defenses these days. If you're in the middle linebacker, depends on if you're on a spill defense or a contain, you know where your safety help is or your run help is. So that's how you can learn how to take on blocks. And once I learned that actually made my technique better and made me more of an explosive player because I knew where I was going. And one thing I always tell young linebackers, you might be going up a guy that's a lot of times 100 pounds, and especially in these days, these linebackers are tiny, 120 pounds bigger, heavier than you, stronger than you. But if you get to them first, everything's all the same. And it's not about getting into a He-Man battle with him. It's getting to where you need to get to, using his leverage against them, getting off the block and making plays. And the biggest thing, this third thing I always tell them, square pads make more plays. And the worst thing I see from the high school and college, a little bit more in the pros, is where guys dip their shoulders and they give up their body. By that time, that's what they want. They want you to just push you right out of the way. Because the one thing I did learn, the difference from college linemen and pro linemen just want to block you. They're out there handling business.
They're not trying to take you out.
Right. Unless you get a few, and that's their game. And generally those are the guys that aren't athletically, capable. So that's their edge. But generally they just want to get you in the way, get you out of the way, and let the running back hit the hole and hit his head on the goalpost. And so, again, if I had to break it down, break the huddle, know everything about that defense, as your job should be. And that's any player. I remember Jason Peter and Christian Peter knowing the checks. So that makes everybody play fair. I mean, it's a team effort, but ideally as a middle linebacker, you got to know where everybody has to do their responsibility in run and pass, know what your play side and backside responsibilities are, then where your help is if you have any, and then go from there. You got to do a lot of tape study. And one thing I will tell them, look, offenses generally run 6 to 8 running plays. They just window dress it. 10 to 12, 14 pass plays, 2 to 4 trick plays. Any playbook.
That's it.
And once you get a beat on 75, 80% of it, they're going to play the percentages because the guys calling the plays are humans, right? So whatever works, they're going to keep calling until you stop it.
Yep.
So if you get burnt on a play,
it's coming.
It's coming. It might come in a different formation, but know it. And then if you really I call it peeling the onion back. Just look at the formations. If there's an offset fullback, that's no different than have 2 tight ends over there right next to each other. It's the same running plays. They're just going to block it a little different. And then it's the same front. So once you kind of really make it simple and really take I call it a third eye view of it, where take yourself out of it, take them out of it, but really sit back and look at just the basics of the offensive formation versus defensive formation, you'll play a lot faster. I think people generally get in their own way.
Okay, so you talked about leveraging the ball instead of leveraging the blocker. What does that mean?
It means if you see, and it really happens on a lot of outside plays, whereas a middle linebacker, you'll see him, if you see a running back take a wide angle, he's going to cut back. Where he takes a more of a 45-degree angle, that's going to bounce out. Where defensive guys these days do it wrong is where they get a wide angle, they're heading to the sideline, right? So they're more or less, so they're trying to outrun the blocks. They're bubbling around the blocks. Well, then that's creating backside cut lanes and actually play side. And when you see the commentators like, oh, he cut it back, well, actually it was play side because the linebacker outran his responsibility. So they're trying to leverage the block instead of leverage the ball. Because if you're inside, if a guy's running to my right, which is his left, if my right eye is matched up with his right eye, I can make every tackle. If he goes to the sideline, I send him to the 12th defender, right? So that's still a tackle in the stat sheet. But if he tries to cut up, he's going to meet me. And if he tries to cut back, I have square pads. I can actually, I call it dip back a little bit, and then you can get in as a secondary defender or a secondary tackler on a backside play. And so once I learned how to leverage the block and or leverage the ball instead of the block, it really made me play faster. And I needed that, you know what I'm saying? And I knew I was more of a realist to myself. I knew that I was going to have to really, really focus on my positives or what I did well as a player versus trying to adapt my game and be somebody I wasn't. You know what I'm saying? And so in order for me to play physical, I had to play faster. I had to be smarter. I had to make sure that my wheels that's what I got paid off of, right? And so once I really I call it falling in love with yourself and your weaknesses, then I was able to play a lot faster. I looked a lot better than I actually probably physically was. And, that's just something I just never went away from.
Okay, so we're going to go to the pros in a minute, but let's stick to the college world. You played for a legendary head coach, Tom Osborne. What is it that you remember the most about him and what impact he made on your game and maybe on your life off the field?
The very first impact he made on me was actually at a table like this, where I only was able to ask him 2 questions, and it was a selfish question. I said, look, coach, if I go play in this high school all-star game and say by chance I get hurt, will you honor my scholarship? And he looked me dead in my eye and he said, once you commit to me, I'm committing to you for 4 or 5 years, however long it takes for you to graduate. I'm fully committed to you as a mentor and a father figure. And he told me and my dad, that is the first impact to me as a man and as a mentor to kids, where if you make a commitment to somebody, you see it through. That's through the good, bad, ugly, great, everything.
Let's move to the NFL. But before you get to the NFL, you got to go through draft weekend. Walk us through the most exciting, fun days of your life going through the NFL draft circa 1999.
After the combine, it was like a sigh of relief. You hit, you kind of show up to the combine, you want to hit certain numbers, it's 20 in the bench and all that. And then there's that dead time, and then you see all the different stories. The internet back then was very, very green. They had KFFL or whatever it was. Mm-hmm. So you check it and see what the rumors are. And we had a deep class, and I didn't really know where I was going to go. I got anywhere from 2nd to 7th round. I mean, that's a ton. And so my draft day experience, I knew I wasn't going 1st round. Probably had a good idea I wasn't going 2nd. 3rd round, then you start watching. Then you don't go the 3rd round. So that first day, you got your family around. It's just very small. And so it becomes stressful. Then you start seeing guys like, man, I saw him at the combine, and then I went to the 4th round. I'm like, okay. And, from, D.C. area, the Redskins picked a guy, I forget his name, that wasn't at the combine. And
linebacker?
Linebacker.
Oh, goodness.
And he only played, I don't even think he made it through a year, but he went 4th round. And then, of course you want to, then.
I think I might remember
from
him.
Georgia Tech.
Yeah.
And so, you start seeing guys and into the 4th round. And I remember Carolina called. The linebacker coach really liked me. And they ended up drafting Hannibal Navies, who's, was from Colorado, ended up, great career. And, you hate when, but I wanted to go to Carolina because they had a lot of Nebraska guys in there. So then I'm at the 5th round. And then you start thinking about the teams you want to go to. And the funny thing about it is like it becomes more stressful because, you just want to get, you always go into the dressing and you just want to get picked. But then you're like, that you're just as good or better than these guys and you had good interviews with them, or you kind of think that you fit into their scheme. and you see guys start to go ahead of you that was either maybe ranked higher or maybe lower. You just kind of see them going. Then you just want to get picked. And really, to be honest with you, the two teams that I didn't interview with or didn't work places I didn't want to go was Buffalo and Green Bay. Well, one, because they had a lot of young linebackers, established guys. And, I'm in Lincoln. You think you want to go to a big city. And it's the end of the 5th round, and the Vikings had told me that they were going to pick me. And they had 2 picks back to back, right? And so they picked a guy named Humphrey from Texas, and they had me on the phone. And then they picked a guy named Chris T. Jones, who was from Clemson, little linebacker. He was like 205 pounds. But they had a guy named Ed McDaniel that was from Clemson that was an established starter. So they thought he was going to be like the replica. So they picked him. Then I was like, I'm not even going to get drafted. I'm thinking, by that time I'm walking out of the house. Phones are going everywhere. And then the next thing you know, 4 picks later, phone rings, the 716 comes up, and I didn't, I had all the scouts and stuff. I'm like, who the hell's calling me from a 716? And everybody says, I had that one uncle that called, and that's like, what's going on with the draft? And I was like, M&F, what the hell I don't know. So 716 called, and it was Ted Cantrell, or it was John Butler. He's like, hey, Jay, this is John Butler. I was like, yeah. He's like, this is the Buffalo Bills. We're going to pick you. I'm like, are you serious? And he's like, yeah, we just turned in the card. And I was, I said, F yeah. And the whole, then it just, everything else that you were mad at or felt disrespected just went out the window. And it was pure elation. We all cried and we all were happy. I'd never been to Buffalo. So it was great. It was, like I said, it was one of those things that was very stressful because you just want to get picked, right? By that time, of course, I came to college with realistic and maybe low expectations, but I've been watching the NFL and dreamed of playing in the NFL forever. Now you're right there, and it's like right on the cusp, and you're waiting for somebody. It's like being chosen for prom or something. And I finally got picked. I didn't care where it was at that point in time. Went to Buffalo, and it was the greatest thing. And at that point in time, I didn't really know that was. I've been really, really blessed, but it was going to be the best thing for me. Small town, great leadership. All football, something that I was used to seeing, which is from Lincoln, to Buffalo. And you've probably been there plenty. It's not, I always say Buffalo's Lincoln on steroids, but it really isn't. Very, very good fan base, very, very loyal fan base. Every game was pretty much sold out. And I got a chance to come in and, had a red shirt year up to the 6th game. And then obviously, was able to jump in there after that. But it was the same type of thing. And I was oddly enough, that George Darlington was going up there all the time getting defensive stuff. So I'd already knew we were running NFL stuff, fire zones and all that stuff, zone blitzes. And they already had a playbook on me on who I was. And so they didn't have to interview me at the combine. So it was pure elation. And then, after, of course, you kind of take a breather. Then really about 4 hours later, the focus immediately changed. So I'm about to go prove people wrong. I'm going to go in there and establish myself. And it was a new challenge. And it was a great thing for me, but it really was something, of course, I'd like to be the number 1 pick, right? But I think where I went in there at really, propelled me to lasting that long. Because I never forgot that day, though. And I never forgot it from the positive standpoint. As I talk about it right now, it still gives me chills. But that negative or that stressful time, I thought about that before every work. I've thought about it every day. And it wasn't something I was angry at people. I just remember, hey, look, dude, I was a 5th round pick. That's essentially just like I always tell people those are extra picks they had. They gave me, a couple pieces of gum and a pat on the butt when I got there. There was no concrete Jay Foreman making the team. And we were deep. We had John Holichek, Sam Cowart. They had a guy named Marlo Perry that was kind of like their dime linebacker. They had a guy named Joe Cummins that was, like one of their special teams guy. But luckily enough, to be honest with you, my experience at outside linebacker and inside, I was able to play both in the 3-4. And I went down on special teams and I made one huge play against the Bengals. Didn't even know what I was doing. Bruce DeHaven said, hey, young buck, you don't even know what the hell you just did. And I didn't. Just did play football. Took on a block, made a tackle, ripped just like we did in college. Ball came out. Keon Carpenter got it. Rest in peace, one of my best friends. We both ended up making the play. I caused the fumble. He got it. He was a free agent from Virginia Tech. Next thing you know, we both end up playing. I know I played 9. I think Keon might have played 10. two guys that probably should only play 2 or 3. So it worked out. But the draft is, I just saw Stanley Morgan, and I told him, look, man, it's going to be stressful. But once you get there, once you get to the NFL, now granted, first round picks have, they give them, now these days, they only give you like 1 or 2. Back then, you would play your rookie contract. Once you get there, there is no fair dodging. You'll go in, if you can play, you're going to play. And that's the great thing about football. It's the ultimate equalizer. The NFL is hard. You're going from college, and you're playing against grown men. You're playing against guys that got 4 kids at home, wives and all that stuff. So they're playing for a bigger purpose. And there is a difference.
There is a difference. Yeah. Well, let me share with you from many years of being an agent, there's 3 time periods or 3 perspectives of the draft. Before the draft weekend shows up, players typically have a myopic perspective on the best case scenario.
Right.
Okay. And there's no doubt you might have went in the second round if they did the draft 100 times in 1999.
Right.
There's a chance you went in the second round a couple times.
Sure.
Third round a few times.
Right.
So and so on. Maybe even in the 7th round.
Right.
All right. No 2 drafts are ever going to be the same.
Right.
And it's just how the cards fall. And there's a lot of debates inside these war rooms between the offensive staff and the defensive staff. And it's like the way they view their own needs changes from day to day. Yeah. So what is it on that day?
Yeah, pick the pick.
No, it's not easy to do. So the thing that I've seen universally is that there's only one guy in the whole draft that's ever happy. One.
Number one.
Because number 2 thought he was going
number 1. Yes.
Right? And so the first pick and the second, he's pissed off the whole time.
Because he didn't go 31. I hear you. I right there.
Okay. So that's pre-draft perspective. Then during the draft, there is that disappointment, but then there's that elation. So it's a sucker punch, and then you come out on top.
Right.
And then there's a perspective of for the rest of your career.
Right.
You get to relive your experience, and you get to get texts and calls from friends and family every time your team drafts a player at your position.
Yep.
And so you really go through the draft every single year.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Oh.
So it's bringing in competition.
Yep.
And if they bring in a guy in the first round at your spot, something's going on, right? So let's move now from the draft to being a rookie.
Yep.
Okay. What was your plan of attack as a rookie to come in, and now you're going against 29-year-old men with a wife and 4 kids and a mortgage and a Jaguar, and he likes his lifestyle, and she likes it even more.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So with all those dynamics going on, what was kind of your plan to make your case for why you should be on the 53 and be playing on Sundays?
Man, I'd never forget my uncle. If my dad ever wanted to communicate something to me, and sometimes you don't want to keep hearing from your dad, my uncle would call, and he was military black background. But he told me, he's like, you pick the biggest and baddest dude, and you kick the crap out of him. And that was just my mentality. I'm going to be noticed. And it's every time they turn on that tape, they're going to see 55 sticking his face in there. And it happened the first play I got in the training camp, and Sam Cowher came in overweight, so they didn't let him practice. So just an hour before the first practice, Wade's like, hey, you're going in with the ones. And literally, I could have crapped my pants. Right? I mean, here I am, right? Yeah. I thought I could ease in there because the mini camps are easy. You're kind of running around, and you go against, I went against Ruben Brown, and I'm thinking, hey, I could have got off that block. But once you put the pads on, it's for real. I told myself, I said, listen here. I just kept replaying what my uncle told me, as I drove up the train. And he probably told me 100 times on the phone, do not back down from anybody. And it was a toss play, and it was 9-on-7. Literally, before Doug Flutie could say, hut 1 or hut 2, I was out of there. And I blew up the whole play. And then it was elation. And it was just one of those things that I knew I had a lot to prove. Buffalo told me, we thought you'd be gone. Well, that's like whipped cream on horse crap. To be honest, yeah, that's great. Well, you know what? You picked Keith Newman in the 4th round and Bobby Collins in the 4th. You could have picked me around early. So I was like, but I had something to prove. And so every day that was it. I mean, then I remember after like the 4th practice, Chuck Lester, who was the assistant linebacker coach, and he might still be there. He was like, hey, look, dude, you are going around knocking the crap out of everybody, but we got to get you to run the plays. But he said, that's a good problem, because he knew what I was trying to accomplish. And the funny thing you said, what you said before about the draft, the third view, I watched the draft when I was on the team just as much as when I did or when I was getting drafted. And funny thing about you said it, I remember I was going into my 4th year. We just had let go of Wade, and I've been starting for 2.5 years now. Felt like I was established, but Greg Williams came in. They drafted Corey Moore from Virginia Tech, who was I think he probably had like 18 sacks when he was there. I mean, right? But he was a small guy, and they were like, oh, we're putting him at outside linebacker. At that point in time, in a 4-3, I was playing outside linebacker, weak side, provide pass rush and all that. So that's the same thing. I knew that they were looking for Jay Foreman, were coming after me. So I had to answer the call again. But prior experience made that easier. But then I look at a challenge because, again, I was going to my 4th year. I was coming up to a contract year. And I knew it was either me or him. My dad always told me, look, they ain't getting nothing unless you let them take it. If you go out there and make plays, they can't not put you out there. And so it was an interesting thing because I felt like, why, why? I'm only 24, 25 years old. You're trying to get me up out of here that quick. But the draft is a very, very, I would really like to be in the war rooms one thing because I can guarantee you guys are just making it too hard. But it's be really, really interesting to be in there and see how they come to the decisions because obviously going through it on one side, but just to see how they make decisions would be really, really a cool experience.
Well, one of the things I can tell you, I've never been in the war room during a draft, but in talking to numerous front office guys over the years, they spend about 90% of their time figuring out that first pick. 90% of their time. Resources, 90%. Evaluation time and discussion, it just seems like it's overweighted, okay? And once they get to the 5th, 6th, 7th round, they don't put as much due diligence into it as you might think.
Right.
Now, the scouts do, but they don't make any decisions. So the scouts have done the foundational work. They've done the background. They've evaluated you on at least 4 game tapes. But the coaches and the GMs, they kind of get real flippant. And you may or may not remember, when you go through that draft, it's a long process.
Ooh. Well,
I mean, you feel like you run like 3 marathons by the time thing's over. Well, even when you watch it as a player and you're a vet, it's long. You get tired of watching the dang thing. It lasts so dang long. Well, it grinds on the front office guys. So by the end, they just sometimes don't make the most logical decisions, right?
Yeah.
So what I guess the thing I would tell you as a player, because you have no control over that, wherever you go, whatever round you're in, you just got to control the controllables and focus on your game because you might have got overdrafted. You might have got underdrafted. It doesn't matter.
Yep.
You're there.
Yep.
What are you going to do now?
Yep.
Right? So let's pretend that you're mentoring let's just say linebacker because that's your thing. I bet it applies to every position. Right. You're mentoring a guy like Stanley Morgan, wide receiver, but he's a linebacker, and he's getting ready to go into the draft this year. And pretty soon he's going to show up for OTAs.
Right.
Okay? And he's going to blink and it's going to be the final cuts.
Yeah.
How do you attack your rookie year? Fresh off the draft, show up for OTAs. You got these guys that have been there. Maybe you have a new coach. Maybe you got a guy like Belichick's been there forever. It doesn't matter. What is your plan of attack for the rookie?
Come in there like you were a free agent. And just have a huge chip on your shoulder and come in there with everything to prove. And you start, you're a freshman in college again. If you take that type of mentality that you're going to come in and leave no stone unturned, and you're going to prove yourself every day, you're going to do anything and everything that you can do, it'll generally all work out for you. I always tell guys, focus on every single day. Now, here's the biggest thing from college to the pros that is, really you have to develop the mindset. As long as you are winning your day, which sounds cliche, that's the only thing that you can control. You can't control what Craig and Jay does because I might not be good that day, but if you are, when they're up there looking at that roster and they're looking at the checks and minuses or checks and balances, if you're a guy that's accountable and that's a good player, that's going to work out in your favor. And so I would just say go in there and raise hell. Go in there as a linebacker and there is no friends. Every day's a fight. And if you're a first-round pick, they're going to try you. They're going to see if you're really worth it. If you're 3rd to 5th round pick, they're going to see how tough you are. 7th, 8th round pick, they're going to probably try to, punk you a little bit. At the end of the day, you got to step up to the challenge, and then you got to prove not only to them, but to yourself. Because there's doubt with every guy that goes into the league. There is an athlete. If you go in there and think with no doubt, then you ain't going to last. Because you could be the number 1 pick if it's Kyler Murray or whatever. Dude, you got doubt everywhere. They doubt how tall you are. So you're going to do something you've never done before. his chip needs to be just as big as the guy that's the last guy picked, or the street free agent that probably thinks he should be picked more than the backup linebacker at the University of Ohio State that never played, but he had a good, private workout and he didn't get picked. So it's a lot to prove, and it's a hard thing to handle, because sometimes guys hang on to the elation after you're getting picked. And then next thing you know, you're in training camp and you're 2 or 3 steps behind. Then you don't have a good rookie year. And from your experience, and I know from my experience, your first impression, which is generally your first year and mainly towards the end of your year, is your first impression. They kind of know whether you're going to, I wouldn't say make it, but they know whether you're a hard worker, accountable, a playmaker, or have potential to, I always say, outlive your shelf life. And that's one thing, is being a late round pick, which I call 5th to 7th guys. That's what you're actually racing against, is because I think that scouts and those guys like, oh, you're only supposed to last this long, right? So once you get to that breaking point, which is to keep going, that's a big thing to do. That's where those first 3 years are so imperative. And if you don't, then they can get another 5th round guy to, run down a kickoff.
And a perfect scenario for roster construction. You want your 5th, 6th, and 7th rounders to be replaced every 3 years. And the reason why is because you're younger, they're healthier, and they're cheaper. Yeah. And right before they get to their second deal, you want a new one. Right? And so unless that guy creates some kind of crazy value that you can't replace, you get rid of him.
Yep.
Okay. So that's why the NFL average length is about 2.7 years, because it really is 3 years, because that's the cheap years of a player's career.
Right.
4th year, you can get the RFA tenders and all that stuff. So what players have to understand when you talk about shelf life, that's real.
Yeah.
Okay. They got a 3-year plan for you.
Right.
Now, if you screw that up, you don't play 3. But if you play well, you're going to play 3, and they're going to get rid of you.
Yeah.
Okay. The other thing I think is very important, and you've mentioned it in one shape or another a couple times, is they're going to attack your weaknesses. They're going to, you've got to be able to understand your own You have to have some self-awareness about what your strengths and weaknesses are to improve on your weaknesses, because that's what they're looking at.
Yeah.
Okay. They like your strengths. That's why you're there. But they're constantly looking at your weaknesses and thinking, can we find somebody else younger, cheaper, and healthier to not have those weaknesses?
Yeah.
Okay. So I have a linebacker with Houston Texans at the moment. He's going into his 3rd year. I just saw him this week. And I said, how's things going? He said, I never knew I was so short. I said, really? He's 6'1.5". And he's all he gets reminded of by the organization. They love him. They love him. He's short. And he's got short arms.
Yep.
So they are always watching his leverage, his ability to get off blocks, because when you have shorter arms, it's hard to get off blocks if you get locked in.
Yeah.
And if you don't utilize your leverage, then why be 6 foot? You should be 6'5".
Yeah.
Right? So the football, generally speaking, and especially in the NFL, always reminds you of your weaknesses.
Yep.
So you have to be able to deal with overcoming those weaknesses or improving those weaknesses. I'm gonna have you compare and contrast college versus pro.
Sure.
One is the game, and put it in 2019.
Yeah.
Okay. What's the big, like playing linebacker in college compared to playing linebacker in the pros? What's the biggest difference?
It's every game in the pros is like a national championship game. And that national championship talent. So it's like if you are supplanted in the Clemson, Alabama game, 16 weeks. That you're playing against the best of the best every single day, and it's for a ton of money, and there's a lot on the line. Lives are on the line. And it's different because college, it's a longer process, 4 or 5 years and stuff like that. But the talent, the depth of talent is so much better. There's no days off. There's a guy that might be undrafted that can come out and make you look silly. That's going to make a name off you. And so that's just being able to deal with that type of competition, that know when you show up to the stadium on Sunday, it's all or nothing. Versus college, so like when we played Colorado, we knew they're going to have 5 or 6 guys drafted on offense, 3 or 4 on defense. That's 8 guys out of 22. NFL, it's not only the starting 11 and on both sides, it's the backups And the guys on the practice squad, if they get called up on the day of the game, they're going to come ready to play. And so, and everybody's good. And everybody's, you got your great players, but everybody is good and everybody deserves to be there. That's the biggest difference from a talent standpoint. College is more of equivalent to the game I played as an NFL player. It's more of a professional. I think of college sports as professional sports. We can get into all that, but that's the way I look at it. Where the NFL is a production. It's entertainment. You know what I mean? Whereas, we got the Tom Brady's and all that. I mean, that's what really is driving it. It's a I would say a money train, but the NFL and college, they both are, they're both punching at each other in the dark on who makes more money. So that's the big difference as far as on the surface of the game. Now, what I see the biggest thing especially from a defensive standpoint, is the college game and the pros, and they both pour into each other. So it pours from the college to the pros. Fundamentals and technique has just been out of thrown out the window. It's more of a, we're going to try to out-athlete you. And that's why New England is so much different. Okay, yeah, we don't have the athletes. What we're going to do, line up two tight ends and a fullback, and we're just going to run it down your face. Rams couldn't handle it. I mean, that's just the way they are. And you talked about before the weaknesses. I always look at a guy that comes out of his first year, primarily at the quarterback position, and has a great year. The second year really tells you if they're going to make it or not. Because now you got the whole offseason to look at what he does well, what he doesn't do well, who did well against them, who didn't, coverages and all that. And that's for players as well. It's just the way it is. And if you go into the offseason too much, going to the different NFL parties and all that stuff, and you're like, oh, I have made it, what's the difference between Kyler Murray and RG3? Now, granted, RG3 got hurt in the Redskins, but there's a big difference once they start to kind of catch on it, right? I mean, you knew it from talking to different guys. That's a big. I mean, you're going to come in and light the league on fire. They're gonna fizzle you out if they can, and if you don't have not only self-awareness but the structure to get you better, you're gonna be out of the league pretty quick.
So it sounds like to me in college, the program dictates your schedule.
Yeah.
Where in the pros, you kind of have to take the bull by the horns and design your own schedule. Because if you only do what they make you do, you're probably not going to make it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the way it is. You see it a lot of times where, I talk about David Carr, and I feel bad for him because I don't think that, like Charlie Caston, those guys really set him up for success. He's the number one pick. Mm-hmm. We had Kent Graham. They cut Kent Graham. He was a 10, 11-year veteran. Obviously wasn't, going to be an all-pro or anything, but he's a vet. He's a pro, right? So we cut him before training camp's over and handed David Carr the keys to the ship. Well, David Carr wasn't able to learn from Kent Graham when to show up, how to study, when to study, and when you should be there. And the thing is, I had to pull David aside, and I said, David, look, man, you need to put more in. He's like, what do you mean? I said, when I get here, you're not here, and when I leave, you're not here. He's like, well, what does that mean? I said, you're the quarterback of the team, and you're the face of this team, and you're the leader. That means you need to put in more time, more effort before and after practice. That's just the way it is. It sucks, and I know you guys, and David learned that. But those first 2 or 3 years, it was hard for him. And that's the biggest thing where you see guys that truly get it and don't get it, or have the structure around them to get it. And when you go to New England, say, like I always admire New England. Look, Bill Belichick's all about football. We're paying you a lot of money, but we expect you to put in more effort than we're actually paying you for. You hear about those guys with Junior Seau was there. They work out at 4 a.m, 5 a.m, film study, practice, probably film study afterwards, go hang out with each other. It's a sacrifice. And the people that you're with, whether it's your wife and kids, got to understand that as well, because that's how the lights are on, turned on and off. And that's just, look, there's a short time that you're going to be able to play professional sports in general, but primarily football. And so you got to, again, we talked about, you got to maximize everything you got to do. And that's before practice, during practice, and after. And some guys just don't know how to, and refuse to. The difference is if you don't know how to versus there's a lot of guys now that refuse to do it. And if I was coming into the league, I would just somehow try to find what they're doing up in New England. How many hours a day are they studying? Then I'm going to study one more. I mean, it's real simple, but nobody else wants to do it. And that's you probably see it from top down. Everybody's trying to copy, I guess, Sean McVay, right? Mm-hmm. Patriots are still winning Super Bowls.
Yes.
It's the funny, guys are getting hired for saying oh, I know Sean McVay because we had one conversation, right? That's Cliff Kingsbury, right?
Yeah.
But nobody's saying, I was at a coach's clinic with Bill Belichick, or I was down at Alabama Pro Day with Bill Belichick, so I should get hired. They've been doing it for, I don't know, 20 years in a row.
It's boring. It's not sexy.
Right.
It's the process that he has, the program that he has. It's a winning formula. It works. You don't win 14 out of 15 divisional titles and go to the Super Bowl 9 times. It's insane what they've done. It's a little bit like what you did in college. Winning 3 national championships in 4 years was just kind of like normal because you were living it.
Yeah.
But now, it's not normal.
Yeah, it's not normal.
Every year you get reminded how special it is. It becomes more special the older you get.
Sure.
We are going to have that same conversation about the New England Patriots once Belichick and Brady are gone.
Yeah.
That, wow, these guys in the first 20 years of the century dominated.
Right. And they're good at doing it. But they've also done it different ways because they were primarily a defensive team, kind of like when I played, and Brady was don't turn it over. Then it went to, let's accentuate Brady. Now it's kind of like we're adapting year to year, but the principles are the same. Maximize it. And it's funny to me that they're trying to get play callers versus trying to get coaches. And that's what he's done. Look, you show up in New England, you could be whatever from any team, Miami Dolphins. There's one way you're going to do things. You go to Alabama. There's one way you're going to – Nick Saban said it. If you're coming as a coach, you're going to be the coach, but this is how we do things here. You're just going to fit in. And he rehabs a lot of coaches, and same thing with Clemson. It's just weird that in sports today, everybody tries to find a different way to do it, and they're not even winners. Because ultimately, the only thing that matters in the NFL as far as from a team standpoint, did you or did you not win the Super Bowl? Because even if you went to the Super Bowl and lost, all you are is just a last place, first place loser. That's it. You just played 3 or 4 more weeks than I did, and you ended up the same end that I did. You didn't win it.
Very few people remember the Super Bowl loser. We just don't. And sometimes we don't care.
Don't care, no.
And ironically, sometimes the Super Bowl loser is looked upon more disfavorably than somebody who didn't even make playoffs.
Yeah.
It's like, you didn't win it. You got there.
Right.
And you couldn't finish it. And so you're like, oh, that team sucked. You know what? They were the second team.
Yeah.
But just humanly and psychologically, sometimes we see those people as losers.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go. I'm going to ask you a 2-part question about if you had an opportunity to do it over again. We're so much wiser and smarter after you're finished with something than when we're going through it. If you had an opportunity to go back to college again, what would you do differently and better? Or sooner?
Yeah, sooner. Probably understand that it's, bigger than me. I think it was probably forced down my throat, maybe like at year 2 or 3. Then the light finally came on. I think I would come in with a different perspective of where I fit into the linebacker room, the defense, and then obviously the whole overall picture. Look, we won 3 national championships, so there's not really much I'd do. I mean, I will say this, if I knew that somebody came and said, Jay, it doesn't matter where you go, you're going to go to the NFL. Would I go to Nebraska if it was all about me? Probably not, because I know that if I would have went another place, I would have probably been featured more than obviously, as more draft stats. But I wouldn't give it up. I would probably wouldn't do that. So I worked. I felt like I have no regrets as far as what I put into it. So there's nothing I'd change. I think probably more of seeing the bigger picture quicker versus kind of beating your head against it and then finally realizing, okay, well, this isn't working. Maybe let me take it. Maybe it's me and not them. And
what's the common mistake that players make about not seeing the bigger picture?
They're just too self-absorbed. Think that the game and the university maybe owes them something. And that's for me. I felt like, well, dude, you owe me to play. I earned it. So and really, once my dad told me, look, Nebraska doesn't owe you anything, neither does football. But you owe football everything. And that means you have to keep pouring it in. And there's no guarantee when you work hard that you're going to get, a positive result. And that took a while for me to kind of grasp, you know what I mean? Because then it became me more than the team. And once I invested more in the team, then, then they start spitting out more me. And then So it just took, the first 2 or 3 years, or first 2 years of playing. But if I had to change anything, that would be it. Where the guys this generation makes mistakes, they don't deviate from that, because once they face competition or adversity, they pack up and leave.
Transfer portal.
Yeah.
Push the button.
Yeah. And I understand, quarterback where, like Georgia, they brought in like 2 number 1 guys. I get it. There's only one position. I think it's too quick and accessible for these kids just to pack up and leave. And, it's hard for them, but they can still make it.
What would you do differently if you were going to the draft this year and you got drafted by the same team, the same round, and you're showing up for OTAs in a month?
I would definitely have the same mentality, but my focus primarily would be special teams and have that business mindset first and foremost. I think where a lot of guys miss the boat is they don't know how to play the game within the game. Yeah, I can hate a coach or hate a situation, but there's a lot of politics. So, these coaches like to get their egos, greased. And so you got to be able to do that. I think I'd probably, understand how some guys, and you're like, dude, how did, like, I remember we had an offensive lineman. I was like, dude, how are you, dude, you're going in year 10? Like, you wouldn't even play at Nebraska. Well, he was, he learned how to kind of, navigate through the, the muddy waters. So I think I'd probably do that a little bit better. Like I said, I always poured everything into it, but just more or less playing the political game a little bit, because that's what it takes. And it generally, one thing I did learn, and this is I did learn, is that coaches, GMs, and, decision makers will be around a lot longer than any player. And they generally go from place to place to place. So it's always good to be in favorable to neutral positions with them. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And that's how you can maybe, get a couple more years out of the NFL. Because at the end of the day, you got to be really fortunate and lucky to win a Super Bowl. I mean, you could be a great player and play for Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I remember Leroy Solomon. He's, he never had a chance to win a Super Bowl. So at the end of the day, you want to get the most years out of all the NFL, and get as many helmets as you can get in your trophy case.
Well, Jay, we covered a lot of things from A to Z: football, Nebraska, NFL, the draft, mindset, overcoming adversity. We covered a lot of things. I want to thank you today for being on our show, and I want to thank you for everything you do for football. You have a tremendous heart for football and the people that play it. I know this sounds crazy, but I would almost encourage you to go into coaching, man.
No, I think that's I wish, but I think years too past that, man. I enjoy mentoring kids.
I got you. Thank you for listening to this episode of Pro Mindset. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. 5 stars, of course. You can follow us on our website, promindsetpodcast.com, or on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Pro Mindset Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you the next time.